At 4:17 a.m., the Central Armed Forces Museum sat under a fragile calm in the heart of Moscow. Suddenly, waves of Ukrainian drones, T-72 seconds, Su-25 seconds, and armored infantry struck in perfect coordination. Kamikaze drones tore through the sky, clearing the way as tanks pushed forward from underground routes. Above, strike jets streaked low at barely 500 feet, unleashing guided missiles into the outer defenses. This was no ordinary assault. It was a strategic strike on Russia's military heart, shattering the belief that Moscow was untouchable. In seconds, silence gave way to fire and chaos. Don't take your eyes off the screen until the secret is revealed. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about this battle in the comments section. Thank you for watching. The opening strike had barely settled when the first assault phase unfolded with brutal precision. Ukrainian kamikaze drones swarmed low over the Central Armed Forces Museum, their warheads detonating with deafening cracks that blinded Russian sensors. Radar screens inside the command post flickered and went dark, giving the attackers a precious window of disruption. Into that gap, autonomous mine-laying robots crawled across the stone plaza, slipping between shattered barricades and planting explosives in calculated patterns. Within seconds, the square turned into a lethal kill zone, designed to funnel any Russian reinforcements into certain destruction. From the east, mechanized infantry mounted on armored carriers surged forward, supported by the thunder of heavy artillery. Batteries of BM-27 Uragan and BM-30 Smerch unleashed full salvos, their rockets shrieking through the night sky before hammering into the outer perimeter. Concrete walls splintered, watchtowers crumbled, and the defensive cordon cracked under the sheer weight of firepower. Panicked Russian commanders scrambled to respond, activating the S-350 air defense batteries hidden within Moscow streets. The launchers roared to life, spitting missiles skyward, but the sheer volume of drones and rockets overwhelmed their targeting systems. Confusion rippled through the Russian network as missiles misfired, some detonating prematurely, others streaking harmlessly into the night. In less than 15 minutes, what had been a fortified monument became a fractured battlefield. The calm of 4:17 a.m. was long gone, replaced by smoke, fire, and the unmistakable rhythm of a campaign designed to cut Moscow's defenses at their very heart. The chaos unleashed by the initial Ukrainian assault had barely settled when Russia answered with a sudden and overwhelming counterstrike. Only 12 minutes after the rockets of the BM-27 seconds and BM-30 seconds ripped apart the outer defenses, the distant rumble of engines filled the western sky. Out of the haze, squadrons of Su-34 fighter bombers dove in from high altitude, unleashing precision-guided bombs that slammed into Ukrainian tank columns maneuvering across the shattered plaza. Simultaneously, the deep rolling thunder of Tuesday 95 bombers echoed overhead, their massive silhouettes launching volleys of Kh-55 and Kh-101 cruise missiles from nearly 500 miles out, streaking toward the city center like fiery javelins. On the ground, Russian snipers armed with Dragunovs occupied rooftops around the museum. From elevated positions some over 200 feet above street level, they created interlocking fields of fire, cutting down advancing infantry and forcing Ukrainian units to scatter into cover. Every shattered window and rooftop became a kill zone, the defenders turning Moscow's architecture into a lattice of deadly crossfire. At street level, Ukrainian armor pressed forward but suddenly met fierce resistance. Russian artillery batteries, hidden in the shadow of government buildings, opened up with relentless barrages. Shells rained down with terrifying accuracy, forcing T-72 seconds and T-80 seconds to veer off their intended routes. One Ukrainian column was pinned against a collapsed overpass. Its progress stalled under the constant pounding of 152mm rounds. Overhead, the battle escalated into a deadly duel of speed and reaction. Ukrainian Su-25 seconds and Su-30 seconds scrambled to intercept the incoming Russian bombers, firing volleys of air-to-air missiles while Russian jets retaliated with heat-seeking R-73 seconds. The sky turned into a twisting theater of contrails and explosions, each side trading blows in a desperate contest for air dominance. In less than half an hour, the Central Armed Forces Museum was transformed into a crucible of modern war. Missiles carving through the night sky, tanks grinding across shattered stone, and soldiers fighting block by block under the shadows of history's relics. The counterattack had shifted momentum, turning the clash from a Ukrainian breakthrough into a brutal test of endurance. The Russian counterattack had threatened to break the momentum, but Ukraine responded with precision and cunning. Rather than meeting Moscow's air power head-on, Ukrainian commanders shifted the tempo of the fight into a battle of deception and coordination. High above the smoke-filled skyline, Su-35 fighters clawed upward, deliberately pulling Russian Su-34 seconds and Su-30 seconds into a swirling contest nearly 30,000 feet above the capital. While the dogfights raged in the upper atmosphere, swarms of small reconnaissance drones slipped in low, weaving through alleys and shattered streets. Their mission was not destruction, but disruption, jamming Russian communications, severing ground-to-air links, and plunging frontline units into isolation. On the ground, Ukrainian mechanized infantry advanced cautiously behind cover, supported by scout robots equipped with cameras and sensors. These unmanned systems crawled over debris and breached side passages, feeding real-time intelligence to armored crews. With the path cleared, T-90 tanks surged forward, their 125mm cannons blasting through barricades as they rolled directly toward the museum's grand entrance. Each shot shook the plaza, stone facades collapsing in cascades of dust. Russian defenders attempted to rally, but Ukrainian snipers armed with Barrett .50 caliber rifles had taken positions on surrounding rooftops. One by one, Russian officers were struck down at ranges over 800 yards, leaving squads leaderless in the chaos. Without coordination, defensive fire slackened, gaps opened in the perimeter, and panic rippled through Moscow's troops. By now, the battle had become a brutal dance of timing. Ukrainian ground forces advanced not in reckless waves, but in calculated pushes. Every step shielded by drones feeding electronic warfare. Every corner secured by precision sniper fire. The earlier fury of Russian artillery now seemed scattered, unable to lock onto targets through the haze of smoke and disrupted signals. In less than an hour, Ukraine had turned Moscow's furious counterstrike into confusion. The once defiant lines around the Central Armed Forces Museum fractured as T-90 seconds pressed to within 200 feet of the museum's front steps, their turrets pivoting slowly, announcing that the heart of Russia's defense was about to be breached. The thunder of Ukrainian T-90 seconds closing on the museum's steps forced Moscow into a desperate gamble. Having failed to hold the perimeter with conventional firepower, Russia unleashed its most feared weapon, the Kinzhal hypersonic missile. Launched from far outside the city, the weapon streaked in at over 6,000 miles per hour, locked on Ukrainian armor clustered in the plaza. For a moment, it seemed inevitable that the strike would end the assault in one blinding flash. But Ukrainian commanders had anticipated such a move. Even as the Su-35 seconds kept Russian fighters occupied at high altitude, specialized electronic warfare units activated their counterplan. Dozens of signal-spoofing drones lifted off at low altitude, each one broadcasting decoy signatures that mimicked tanks and troop formations. From barely 300 feet above the ground, these drones weaved erratically across the city grid, scattering false returns across Russian tracking systems. The Kinzhal's onboard guidance wavered, then veered, plunging harmlessly into an abandoned industrial block on the city's edge. At that same moment, Ukraine seized the initiative. From long-range platforms, volleys of Kh-101 cruise missiles arced in from the east, bypassing the dogfights raging above. Their targets were not the museum itself, but the Russian supply depots hidden in Moscow's outskirts. Explosions ripped through fuel convoys and ammunition dumps, flames lighting the night sky for miles. The strike severed the Russian lifeline, cutting reinforcements off from the embattled defenders inside the capital. The effect was immediate. With resupply points in chaos and their prized hypersonic weapon wasted, Russian forces around the museum faltered. Ukrainian infantry surged forward again. Now supported by uninterrupted logistics, the plaza trembled under the echo of advancing armor, the once proud defenses shrinking into pockets of resistance. In less than an hour, the battle had escalated into a contest of extremes. Hypersonic missiles against decoy drones, strategic bombers against precision counterstrikes. And in that exchange, Ukraine proved it could not only withstand Russia's most advanced weapons, but turn their failures into tactical advantage at the very heart of Moscow. The failure of the Kinzhal strike and the destruction of Russian depots gave Ukraine the momentum it needed to push directly into the heart of Moscow's defenses. Now came the brutal phase of urban warfare, the decisive battle for control of the museum grounds. Ukrainian T-90 seconds, T-72 seconds, and armored infantry carriers pressed in from multiple directions, their cannons thundering at close range. Each 125mm shell tore through stone monuments and bronze statues that lined the plaza, once symbols of past wars, now reduced to rubble under the weight of a new conflict. The very landmarks of Russian military pride became collateral in a fight for survival. Desperate to halt the assault, Russian operators brought every remaining S-350 launcher online. From concealed positions in nearby streets, the batteries fired in rapid succession, missiles shrieking overhead, in an attempt to thin the waves of advancing drones and armored columns. But the sheer volume of engagements overwhelmed the system. Guidance radars overheated. Reload crews fell behind pace, and within minutes the once lethal shield was sputtering, firing blindly into the smoke-choked sky. Some missiles exploded prematurely, showering their own defenders with shrapnel. Beneath the plaza, a quieter but equally deadly battle was unfolding. Ukrainian mine-laying robots deployed earlier in the chaos reached pre-programmed positions under the museum's sublevels and maintenance tunnels. With synchronized detonations, they collapsed key passageways and service routes, sealing off the underground approaches. Reinforcements attempting to reach the museum from adjoining blocks found themselves cut off, blocked by fire and twisted steel. Above ground, the environment transformed into a labyrinth of destruction. Smoke rose thousands of feet, curling over the Moscow skyline, while flames licked at the museum's facade. The battlefield became a maze of broken stone, burning vehicles, and craters gouged deep into the square. Ukrainian infantry advanced cautiously, weaving between wreckage while snipers picked off Russian gunners still manning defensive nests. The roar of tank engines mixed with the crack of rifles and the boom of collapsing structures, creating a relentless soundtrack of modern war. What had begun as a sudden strike at 4:17 a.m. had now evolved into an inferno of urban combat. The Central Armed Forces Museum, once a monument to Russia's military history, stood engulfed in fire and steel, a stage for a battle that was no longer about relics of the past, but about the future of the war itself. The inferno that consumed the plaza in Phase 5 left Russian defenses fractured beyond repair. Through clouds of smoke, Ukrainian infantry stormed the Central Armed Forces Museum, clearing room after room with disciplined precision. Display halls, once filled with relics of past wars, were now repurposed as makeshift barricades. Every shattered exhibit turned into cover. Russia rushed special forces from the city's outskirts, but their advance was stalled by autonomous sniper drones firing with deadly accuracy from rooftops and alleys. Within minutes, all communications inside the museum fell silent, sealing the collapse of Moscow's defensive center. With Russian defenses silenced and the museum fully in Ukrainian control, the battle reached its inevitable conclusion. The Central Armed Forces Museum still stood in form, but its symbolic role as the heart of Moscow's military pride was gone. Strategically, Russia lost more than a building. It lost confidence, forced to disperse its command network across the capital. The question now lingers: if Moscow's core can fall, what fortress is truly safe? Ukraine opened corridors for wounded Russians to withdraw, proving this strike targeted systems, not civilians. Above it all, a column of black smoke rose thousands of feet, marking both an end and a warning. At 4:12 a.m., the Baltic coast near Baltijsk lay under a heavy mist, the port lights barely piercing the fog. Without warning, Russian submarines fired heavyweight torpedoes from beneath the Gulf of Gdansk, while S-400 launchers onshore powered up their radars, locking onto Ukraine's incoming drone flotilla from the west. This was no random skirmish, it was a full-spectrum clash across sea, air, and land. Baltijsk was not just a port, it was the beating heart of Russia's Baltic fleet. In seconds, the calm would shatter, and what followed would become a lesson in modern warfare. The first wave came swiftly after the Russian torpedoes cut through the water. From the western horizon, Ukraine launched a screen of coastal reconnaissance drones, their small frames skimming just 150 feet above the sea, mapping every radar pulse and heat signature around Baltijsk. Beneath them, unmanned surface vessels USVs crept forward at barely 25 miles per hour, hugging the wake of the waves as they closed to within 3 miles of the harbor entrance. Overhead, FPV drones darted in erratic patterns, while long-range UAVs at 12,000 feet projected decoy signals, crafting a corridor of false echoes across Russian radar scopes. Baltijsk's defenders reacted quickly. A Staragushi-class corvette tied up less than 900 feet from the main pier, powered up and brought its deck guns online. From the shoreline, a Panzer S-1 battery rolled forward, its twin 30mm cannons and 12 missile tubes tracking the incoming swarms. Warning sirens echoed through the harbor. The radar operators reported multiple contacts converging at once. What Ukraine had set in motion was not yet the killing strike, but the opening probe. By forcing Russia to light up its defenses, naval, ground, and radar, the Ukrainian drones were mapping every blind spot, every angle of fire, and every reaction time. Baltijsk, the fortress port of the Baltic fleet, was now fully awake, its defenses burning power and ammunition at a pace Ukraine had calculated from the very start. The probing strikes had forced Baltijsk's defenders to fully reveal themselves. But Ukraine's real play was only beginning. Minutes after the first wave of reconnaissance drones and USVs triggered the alarm, a second formation appeared low over the Baltic waters. Flying barely 200 feet above the waves, dozens of kamikaze drones raced forward in a wide arc, their engines buzzing like a swarm of wasps. To Russian radar operators, this was the main assault, fast, direct, and lethal. The reaction was immediate. S-400 launchers stationed east of the port swung their tubes skyward and let fly their first interceptors. Streaks of fire ripped across the dawn sky, covering distances of 30 miles in seconds. From within Baltijsk itself, Buk M3 batteries engaged, their missiles climbing rapidly to meet the low-flying drones. Radar screens filled with tracks, icons flashing red, as operators struggled to separate real threats from decoys. Every available defensive system was burning through ammunition, and the entire harbor echoed with the roar of engines and missile launches. Out at sea, hidden beyond the 12-mile line, Ukrainian patrol vessels executed the second phase of the trap. From their launch rails came Kh-31P anti-radiation missiles, skimming at Mach 2 toward the glowing Russian radars. The moment Russian operators switched to full-power scanning, they became targets. Within minutes, the air defense net that had seemed impenetrable was under pressure, radars flickering as crews switched frequencies or went dark to avoid being struck. By the time the first wave of kamikaze drones detonated against the outer defenses, the real purpose of the sacrifice was clear. Many of the small UAVs were shredded by missiles or gunfire, but each one forced Russia's systems to expend precious interceptors. Each one carved seconds of distraction into the defensive rhythm. Behind the smoke and wreckage, the radar grid now carried holes, blind corridors where Ukrainian strike assets could slip through unseen. Baltisk's garrison had won the exchange on the surface, downing wave after wave of drones, but they had paid a hidden price. The air defense network was stretched, its operators fatigued, its interceptors depleted. In the darkness beyond the horizon, Ukrainian crews watched the flicker of radar screens grow erratic. The fortress port had survived the opening blows, but the shield around it was cracked, and through those cracks, the next strike was already closing in. The smoke of intercepted drones still lingered over Baltisk when the battle shifted beneath the waves. Russia, unwilling to let the port's defenses be dictated by swarming UAVs, committed one of its most dangerous assets, a Kilo-class submarine lurking just outside the harbor's defensive perimeter. Silent and low in the water, the diesel-electric vessel adjusted its bearings and fired two heavyweight torpedoes, each more than 20 feet long and racing at over 50 miles per hour, aimed straight toward the Ukrainian USV formation, probing the coastline. For a moment, it seemed the sea itself had turned into a weapon. The torpedoes churned white trails through the black water, closing the gap toward the unmanned craft. But Ukraine had anticipated this countermove. Small escort boats, less than 150 feet in length, had been trailing the USVs, towing specialized sonar nets designed to create a distorted acoustic picture. Alongside them, newly deployed underwater drones released bursts of synthetic noise, mimicking engine signatures and propeller cavitation. To the Russian fire control computers, the sea lit up with a dozen false echoes. The torpedoes veered, chasing phantom targets into open water, detonating harmlessly in a distant spray. The reprieve was brief. The Kilo class, now rising to periscope depth for a clearer picture, exposed itself at the wrong moment. One Ukrainian USV, carrying a warhead of nearly 400 pounds, broke formation and accelerated. Skimming across the chop at 40 miles per hour, it aimed directly at the faint silhouette breaking the surface. Russian sailors onshore glimpsed it only seconds before impact. The explosion came with a thunderous crack, a column of seawater blasting skyward as the drone slammed into the submarine's forward hull. The shockwave rippled across the harbor, rattling windows along the piers and sending vibrations deep into the port's steel framework. For an instant, the entire waterfront seemed to shudder. In Baltisk's command posts, alarms multiplied. What had begun as a drone diversion had now dragged the fleet's undersea assets into open combat. The harbor's defenders were forced to divide their attention, missiles and radars scanning the skies above, while sonar operators strained to find the next threat below. The message was unmistakable. Ukraine was not merely challenging Russia in the air or on the surface, it was contesting every layer of the battle space. And in striking a submarine within sight of its own fortress port, Kyiv had proven that even the silent hunters of the Baltic were no longer safe. The defenders of Baltisk had absorbed the blow, but the battlefield beneath the waves had already shifted against them. The blast from the crippled submarine was still echoing across the harbor when the battle leapt skyward. With Russian defenses reeling from the undersea strike, Ukraine unleashed its most ambitious wave yet. From the western horizon, Bayraktar TB2 drones swept forward at 18,000 feet, their wings glinting faintly against the morning haze. Each carried advanced targeting pods, relaying coordinates in real time to strike aircraft waiting beyond the radar line. Moments later, the deep rumble of Ukrainian Su-24 bombers rolled across the Baltic air, launching Storm Shadow cruise missiles that streaked low over the waves at nearly 600 miles per hour. The first Storm Shadows slashed in from the north, hugging the sea surface before climbing suddenly toward the coastline. Their targets were clear: hardened fuel depots and command bunkers nestled around Baltisk's piers. Simultaneously, swarms of kamikaze drones dove toward the harbor from multiple bearings. One group plunged directly at a fuel storage site less than 1,200 feet from the main pier, while others angled for radar stations and parked vehicles. The intent was overwhelming saturation, too many threats from too many directions for Russia's defenders to intercept at once. The response from Kaliningrad was immediate. Russian air controllers scrambled Su-27 fighters from Chkalovsk Air Base, less than 20 miles inland. Within minutes, the jets were roaring overhead, afterburners cutting through the low clouds, climbing to intercept the intruding TB2 Second and Storm Shadows. Contrails twisted into the sky as air-to-air missiles streaked across the battlespace, exploding into blossoms of fire. The fight that followed was chaotic, an aerial brawl layered directly over the smoking port. Ukrainian drones tried to evade, diving and climbing in erratic arcs, their electronic warfare modules spitting jamming bursts across Russian frequencies. Storm Shadows, flying autonomously, adjusted course mid-flight to avoid interception, skimming just 100 feet above rooftops as they closed the distance. Below, Panzer S-1 units fired volley after volley, tracers stabbing into the sky, while Buk M3 missiles chased shadows across the radar grid. Despite the ferocity of the defense, at least one kamikaze drone broke through. It slammed into the side of a massive oil tank near the pier. The detonation thundered across Baltisk, sending a column of flame hundreds of feet high, black smoke curling upward like a signal to the entire Baltic Sea. Fire crews scrambled, but secondary blasts followed as pipelines and storage drums ignited in sequence. Overhead, the dogfight raged on. Ukrainian TB2 Second provided steady targeting, even as Russian Su-27 Second scored kills, knocking several from the sky. Yet each second the fighter spent dueling drones meant another Storm Shadow slipped closer. For Baltisk's defenders, the nightmare was unfolding. While they fought for control above the harbor, the true danger was racing in at wave-top level, invisible until the final moments. In this phase, the port was no longer just under attack. It had become the center of a three-dimensional battlefield, where steel, fire, and sky collided in the most volatile strike yet. The air above Baltisk was chaos, and in that chaos, Ukraine pressed its advantage. The skies above Baltisk were still lit with missile trails and burning drones when the decisive strike unfolded below. With Russia's air defenses fully engaged against Storm Shadows and kamikaze UAVs, a new threat crept silently from the north. It was a low-profile Ukrainian USV, its hull coated with radar-absorbing panels and running nearly invisible at less than 5 feet above the waterline. Packed with nearly 1,000 pounds of explosives, it pushed forward at 35 miles per hour, slipping past coastal radars, distracted by the aerial battle overhead. The timing was no accident. As the USV closed within 800 feet of the northern pier, a coordinated dive began in the sky. Ukrainian UAVs plunged toward a Staragushi-class corvette moored at the dock, their warheads slamming into its superstructure in near-simultaneous strikes. Flames erupted from the deck, the ship's own ammunition cooking off in violent bursts. Even as the corvette's crew scrambled to contain the fires, the true killing blow was seconds away. At precisely 4:37 a.m., the USV made contact. It drove headlong into the reinforced pier wall beneath the main warehouse complex. The explosion ripped through the harbor with a blast wave strong enough to shatter windows a half-mile inland. The pier's steel supports buckled instantly, cranes toppled into the water, and the shock tore open nearby fuel tanks. Fire roared upward, igniting the already damaged corvette and spreading across the dockyard. Within moments, a chain reaction began. Secondary explosions rolled through ammunition bunkers and fuel depots, each detonation feeding the next. Towers of flame rose hundreds of feet into the sky, painting the Baltic horizon in searing orange. Entire sections of Baltisk's waterfront were engulfed, warehouses collapsing as shockwaves rippled outward. What had started as a probing drone assault had now escalated into the unthinkable. The heart of Russia's Baltic fleet was burning from within. Baltisk was no longer just a fortress under siege, it was a port consumed by fire. The inferno at Baltisk raged on, flames leaping hundreds of feet into the night sky. When the echoes of the last detonation began to fade, amid the collapsing warehouses and burning ships, Ukrainian reconnaissance UAVs circled quietly overhead, their cameras capturing the devastation below. Through the smoke and shattered steel, small groups of Russian sailors could be seen crawling across the pier, some clutching wounds, others dazed by the shockwave. The fortress port was broken, but the men lying amid the wreckage were no longer combatants, they were survivors. Then came an unexpected act. From one of the hovering drones, small containers began to drop, guided by parachutes toward the ruined pier. Inside were medical kits, bandages, tourniquets, and morphine injectors, meant not for Ukrainian fighters, but for the wounded Russians scattered among the debris. Over the drone's encrypted channel, a simple message was transmitted. "We strike to end the war, not to strip men of their dignity." For a moment, the chaos of battle seemed to pause, even as fires raged and secondary blasts echoed in the distance. The sight of medical supplies drifting down through the smoke painted a stark contrast. Destruction and mercy coexisting in the same sky.